Hello, in this video we're going to learn how to draw a simple shape. In this case it's 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. The first thing you need to think about is positioning it right in front of us. And the piece is going to, or the drawing is going to deal with foreshortening and visual measurement. So make sure, imagine a line kind of shooting out from the in between your eyes, straight out, and that line is perfectly bisecting that sheet of paper. The other thing to think about is the front edge of that sheet of paper, the edge closest to you. Make sure it's parallel to your shoulders, to your body, not tilted one way or another, because this is a one perspective drawing. One point perspective drawing, meaning that the leading edge of the object you're drawing is parallel to your body. And see how the lines are kind of on both edges are going off to a vanishing point off the outside of the outside of the video. So what we need to think about is obviously there's the lens here is forcing the perspective a little bit, but we can see those edges tilting inward, like I say, moving to the vanishing point. The other thing, though, that is happening is that we're not sure about how much of the piece of paper we actually see because it's moving away from us. That's called foreshortening. So one technique to do that is to use a pencil, close one eye, and line the tip of the pencil up with the back edge of the piece of paper, and slide your thumb down and use your thumb to demarcate the front edge of the sheet of paper. So there's the depth of the piece of paper, and I'm hanging on to that measurement. Now what I'm going to do is relate it to the width of the sheet of paper, okay, the leading front edge. That's going to be our benchmark, and I get about 1.5 or thereabouts. So the height, or the depth, we could say, of this piece of paper as we're looking at it is equal to 1.5. See that? See how I slide that over? 1.5 of the depth, okay? So there's our 1, and the 1 fits into the front 1.5 times. Doesn't look like that. It should be that way, right? Because the piece of paper is longer than it is wide, and we've positioned it in such a way that the long edge is leading away from us, right? It was in the lesson description. I wanted that piece of paper, the long edge, to move away from us. So I'll show you here in a few minutes the how to correct your drawing, because I had you make a drawing based on observing this sheet of paper, and most of the time the students tend to not get the drawing correct. So in a few minutes here I'll show you how to change your drawing so that it'll reflect those proper proportions. Again, I'm going to do this again for you. So I'm closing one eye. I don't have to do it with a camera, right? But height. So the depth or height of the thing is equal to 1 and about 1/2 the width of the front. Now when you put that pencil up, don't lean it, don't tilt it away from you. You've got to always keep it parallel. Again, I'm measuring the whole length of that sheet of paper. This is kind of a difficult technique. See, don't tilt it forward. Going along with that plane that's moving away from you, you've got to keep it parallel to your body. So that pencil has to be straight up and down because it's reflecting the flatness of the drawing you're going to be drawing on. You can't push the pencil into a drawing, right? So the pencil has to be totally flat to your body. Don't do that. You don't want the pencil to lie in the direction of the paper. It needs to be straight up and down. It's kind of hard to see there, but it's vertical relative to the lens of the camera I'm using to shoot. So there's my 1. Again, just repeating here. and about a half again. There's the 1. See, it's right, I'm holding my thumb right at the bottom, right where the paper begins, and the pencil tip is at the top, right? So we got length versus width issues here. Kind of a simple object there, right? So you see how complex drawing is. So your eye is actually seeing the way the thing looks. But your brain is saying, oh, it's longer than it is wide. So what you end up with when you draw the thing is a drawing that kind of reflects what your brain is telling you. It's something, the thing that you're drawing is deeper than it is wide, because that is the, that's the way the piece of paper is configured. So the visual measurement helps you to make that correction. Okay, now most of your drawings will probably look something like this. Not all the time, but where the edges are kind of pointing in a little bit, leaning in a little bit, getting that sense of perspective. Now the way we've drawn it here, in error, is the way we know it, like 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So see where I'm grabbing the ruler down there? Again, turn your ruler over. You don't need numbers here. All you need to kind of think about are halves and quarters and things such as that. So there's 1. There's the whole length of the drawing of the piece of paper, right? Now I'm going to compare that to the width. Now in this scenario, the length is bigger than the width, right? Remember when we did the when we measured the actual thing, the length was shorter than the width. That's where our brain is telling us one thing and our eyes are saying something else. Because we're all probably going to tend to draw it, taller, or longer than it is wide. Because we know the shape, that's the shape of the paper. We aren't seeing the foreshortening. So what I have to do is take a guess. I'm going to put a little mark on the paper. And I'm going to say that's now the back edge, the farthest edge, instead of the one line way up there. So now I'm going to test this and turn it sideways and see if my guess was right. Remember, I have to be 1.5 based on my original measurement. Right there, I'm about 1 to 1. So my guess is incorrect. With say a little bit left over there. So let's move it down some more. Take another guess. So I'll lay the tip of the ruler there. Notice I'm not using the pencil here, right? Just using the ruler because the distances are longer. So I'm grabbing the ruler right at the bottom of the paper, leading edge of the paper, and lining the back of the ruler up with that new mark I made. That's still about 1 to 1, right? So that's not right. We need to have the length of the thing, right? The depth of it be less than the width of it by a half. So I made a new mark. Test that out. That's getting better. I got 1 and a little left over. See that? Not quite a half again, right? So there's my 1. I need to have the stuff that's left over equal half of that 1. Okay? I don't have that yet. So I got to move the dot down some more. This is complicated. So I moved it down some more. So I'm shrinking the 1, right? Let's turn that. There's the new measurement. Now I have 1, and I got more left over. Is it a half? I'm close. Not quite half yet of the one that the new 1, right? The new unit that I have. Let's move it down a little bit more. So I'm going to the new little mark I made, grabbing right down at the bottom there, putting my thumb at the bottom of the paper, turning it to the corner. Now I've got 1. Put a little mark on the paper, you can do that. Slide it over, and about a half, it's getting close. So see where that mark on the ruler is? You can't really see it, but it's halfway across that first unit, that 1 unit that I have. So I just lowered it a little bit because I wasn't quite happy with it. Let's test that out. So there's my 1, my front to back. 1. Turn it sideways. That fits in the width. 1. That's that little mark I'm putting down. Slide it over to my thumb gets there. And a half. See it sneaking out right there? right? So I have the original unit 1 and I divide it in half. Now the front to back, all I'll do is put a straight line across there. Now believe it or not, that is as much as of the depth that we were seeing in that drawing of that first, of the actual sheet of paper when we did our measurement, when I did the measurement. You'll be doing it, yourself. So that bottom portion, those are the 4 corners of the new shape, is as much as we were actually seeing of the depth of that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So what I want you to do is gently erase away all the excess, all that stuff you thought you saw. This is called foreshortening, and the only way you can kind of really understand what's happening foreshortening is to actually measure with that technique using the pencil the front to back relationship versus the width of something. In this case it was the front edge of the sheet of paper, right? And I got 1 to 1.5. So the 1 was the front to back relationship. Turned that sideways and it fit across the front 1.5 times. Here's my 2 front corners. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tilt those lines in just a little bit because of 1-point perspective. We'll deal with that a little bit later. But what happens is, first rule of perspective is as things move away from you, they get smaller. So the back edge of this rectangular sheet of paper needs to be a little shorter than the front edge. So by default, those edges moving away from us tend to pinch in a little bit. They go to, like I said, the 1 point or a vanishing point. We can't see that. That's off the edge of the paper, out of the view of the camera. But those would pinch in and go up to what's called a vanishing point on the horizon line. We'll deal with that later. So actually, that's what that sheet of paper looks like. Now, in my original view, the lens, I use a wide angle lens, so those angles that are pinching in there on the edges are a little bit more tilted in on the camera view. But as you're viewing it in real life, you'll probably notice that it's not that dramatic. So they're going to subtly tilt in like I've done on the drawing here. They're not going to be as dramatic as they are in the sample I did earlier when we were actually looking at the 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and measuring it. So look at the difference between the two, right? Kind of tilting this line in a little bit more here. So that's what the piece of paper actually looks like. That's what our eyes are seeing. What our brain is telling us is that first version, right? That really tall version, right? We were drawing the actual dimensions of it as we know it, right? But our eyes, and how do we know this? Because we tested it out with a visual measurement. So what I want you to do also is put a little X at that leading edge. I want you to understand that that bottom line is the line that's closest to you. So I just put closest edge. And then I'm kind of putting my name down there. Make sure your name is on the drawing. And then it's on, I drew it on the piece of paper itself is horizontal, right? So, make sure your drawing is in a horizontal configuration. And you're just doing a simple drawing of that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper using 4 straight lines, right, as I outlined in the instructions. And then correcting it based on visual measurement. So you're first drawing the uncorrected version, right? The one you do just on your own, and then you correct it as this video demonstrates how to do. So something to keep in mind is that depending on how high you sit, or if you're slouching down or whatever in your chair, the height of your head, i.e. your eyes, right, from the surface of the table will dictate the measuring, right? So some people may measure 1.5 lengths fitting in the front edge width. Some people may measure 2.5 if they're really scooched down, right? For somebody sitting up really straight, it may be 1 to 1, so that'll vary upon, how tall you are, how tall the table is, how tall the chair is, and how you're sitting in the chair as well. So that's a variable that you need to think about in doing your visual measurement. And the other thing is, this is probably new to everybody, so practice visually measuring. That's not that's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult to keep that pencil parallel to your body, straight up and down. The tendency is to want to tip it towards the plane of the paper, right? Tip it away from you. And closing one eye and sliding the thumb down is not easy either. One thing you want to be mindful of is when you make your first measurement long ways, the depth of the thing, don't move the pencil in and out and turn it when you turn it sideways. You got to keep the pencil the same distance from your eye when you make both measurements. And you're just measuring a 1-to-1, this versus that. In this case, it's depth versus width. Coming up with a ratio, 1-to-2, the depth fits twice across the front, for instance. It's not always going to be that easy, and then you apply that to the drawing. You already have the width, so you're not going to change the front width. You're just going to change the depth of it, right? The length of the piece of paper, so that new length fits in the width the appropriate amount of times. That's all you're doing. Don't change the width of it. Keep that the same. That's your benchmark. All you're doing is shrinking the depth of the piece of paper so that it fits what your measurement says. If it is 2-to-1, for instance, or 1.5-to-1. So it's always a ratio that you're looking for. Depth or length of something to width of something. And you got to keep one of those things the same. In this case, the width stays the same, and you're just shrinking the depth of it, or the length of the piece of paper, to reflect that, what we call foreshortening quality. Okay, and we'll go over it too, and I'll be able to answer questions as well. Alrighty, thank you.